Jim Schwartz just did his introduction press conference, which you could probably watch by this time on clevelandbrowns.com, or it's definitely on their Twitter. If you have not seen the whole video, it's a long watch, and I recommend you watch it if you're really interested. But I'm going to go over some of the spark notes and kind of talk about some of the things that I felt like were interesting from the press conference. And one is just my overall impression of Jim after the press conference, which is he seems like a competent defensive coordinator. He seems like a guy who has done this before many times. He seems like a guy who has really understands the position he's in, the urgency that he needs to have in this position. And also a guy who kind of gets what his role is in this. He doesn't seem like he has more ambitions right now in his career than to be a defensive coordinator, which I think is important, right? Because sometimes what can be a problem is, say this person on paper is a great hire, but also you know that this person has much, much higher ambitions, and that's usually fine, right? But you have to weigh that in context of what's going on. One, if your seat's not secure, you don't want to bring in somebody who could be seen as a candidate for your seat, because that's just not going to make the working relationship be of one of trust, right? If I brought somebody to co-host this show that I felt like was going to try to take my show, it wouldn't be a good show, right? Because I wouldn't trust that person enough to allow them to shine, and vice versa. That person wouldn't trust me enough to allow me to shine, because we're both trying to get the same spot, right? You don't want to have people competing for the head coaching job in the building, because that's not going to lead to success. That is a dumpster fire, an absolute dumpster fire. You want people who are secure in their roles. Maybe a promotion comes, maybe it doesn't, but hey, I am fine doing this. This is what I'm doing. This is who I am, and this is what I want to do. And that's what Jim Schwartz comes off as, is like, I've been head coach before. I've been this and that, but this is what I'm doing now. And he's a defensive coordinator now. Maybe he gets another opportunity a la Brian Dable. Maybe he doesn't, but it seems like he's at the point of his life where he's just appreciative to have this position in the NFL. And he seems like a wealth of knowledge, right? He did all the like old football guy coach stuff where he kind of came in there and just chatted with the media, to be honest. It wasn't like Greg Williams had the most theatrical press conference of all time, where he came in there and he had all of his Greg Williams quotes, and he knew which specific media members he wanted to make fun of, and it won over a lot of fans, and it was great for that. But that's kind of what the Greg Williams experience is. It's a lot of theatrics, a lot of extra, right? It's kind of why the players who he's played under play under him. Some of them love him, some of them hate him, right? With Jim Schwartz, it seems like a very down-to-earth guy. It seems like a guy who has been in the room coaching professional football players, right? None of this gimmicky college stuff, none of this gimmicky, I'm going to dictate through the media how you're going to run. It seems like a grown man who's used to coaching other grown men, who knows how to coach grown men. And one of the things he touched on in this press conference, which I felt like was important, was he also understands the importance of not just coaching the players, but coaching his coaches. I think that's very important, right? Joe Woods, I don't know what he was specifically strong at in that job, in that role, and what he was weak at. But there seemed to be problems with communication. When it comes to what the play call is and what guys should be doing. There seems to be problems with guys expressing what they want in the game plan to him, and that getting up to him. And there seem to be problems within the staff itself, right? Where certain guys didn't feel like they were being utilized. And that all created a mess on the field, where you have one of the most talented defenses in the NFL, but it didn't mean anything because you couldn't get any of the basics right. With Jim Schwartz, I'm very confident that that's not going to be a problem. Is this going to be a top 5 defense? I don't know. It could be. But what I am confident in is that the floor has risen so much from last year, right? They could only be but so bad. Now, again, I said that last year. Hopefully I'm not wrong about that. But I think that was my overall, like my biggest takeaway from the press conference was, okay, they're like on the defensive side of the ball, there's an adult in the room, right? We've had the adult in the room with Kevin Stefanski and Alex Van Pelt for the last 3 years on the offensive side of the ball. But defensively, there's been this consistent feeling every year that there was not an adult in the room, somebody who just knew and everybody trusted that they knew, and they just kind of did that. It just didn't feel like they had that, right? Offensively, there's things to point to like, hey, there's trust there on the offensive side of the ball. There never felt like there was trust on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that is one of the big failures of Joe Woods, is that he never cultivated that trust. That was actually one of the first things that Jim Schwartz talked about was, hey, the first thing, the most important thing is that I get that trust early, right? Because that trust is going to bring everything else. And when you are a player and you're looking at Joe Woods, who's new at this, it's going to be harder to trust him, especially the higher caliber player you are, right? And this defense has a lot of high caliber players. You know what I mean? I think that's one of the things they didn't think about when they brought in Joe Woods to be the defensive coordinator of the defense, or when Kevin brought in Joe Woods initially to be the defensive coordinator of defense. I think that wasn't something that he thought of, was this defense has some of the best young players in the league. At the time, they were young players, but now you're bringing in a defensive coordinator who, these aren't young players anymore. These are just some of the best players in the league at this point, right? Like Myles Garrett is at a level where if you bring in a first-time defensive coordinator, the vibes got to be real strong for him to fully buy in and trust, right? Whereas you bring in Jim Schwartz, and he can look at Jim Schwartz's resume and see, okay, well, he won the Super Bowl with the Eagles, and look at what they did with that defensive line. Look what he's done for Ndamukong Suh. Look what he did for a guy like Nick Fairley. Look what he did for this guy. Look what he did for this guy, that guy, that guy, that guy, that guy. And he goes, okay, Jim knows what he's doing. You know what I mean? I feel like the organization is putting somebody to put me in position that has done this, put people in position to be successful. So I trust that I'm going to be in a successful spot going forward, right? That's a lot easier to do when you have the resume that Jim Schwartz has, which is, hey, he has been, that Eagles Super Bowl run, the defense was unequivocally the reason why they won that Super Bowl. Like Nick Foles played great, but he was able to be the quarterback of a Super Bowl winning team because of the defense that Jim Schwartz was in charge of. You know, they were very good. He also emphasized that he's going to be kind of like what I speculated. There's going to be a focus on defensive line play. This is a switch of philosophy. And my issue with Joe Woods' defense wasn't the alignment, wasn't the zone coverage numbers or anything like that. It was the overall philosophy that I felt like was failing this team, which was, we're going to build from the back to the front. So Joe Woods' philosophy was, hey, we're going to choke them on the back end, and that's going to create sacks. I have issues with that in the modern NFL because you just can't cover that well anymore. Even the best cover guys get beat all the time now, because the rules are just such that, it's designed that, hey, a B- wide receiver should be able to get open versus an A+ corner every once in a while. That's just what the rules are shaped to. That's how it's slided there. So if you want to go against that and try to counter that, your best way to counter that is to just never let the ball get thrown in the first place. And that is to have great defensive line play. Make it hard to get the ball out, right? Just stop it at the point of attack, and all of a sudden your corners will become much better. And then you could trust them being man more situations, right? And I think that's what's going to happen. The man rate's going to go up. We're going to play more man coverage. I think a lot of people are going to be happy with that. They're not going to blitz that much. They're not going to blitz much more than they did, but I don't think that's going to matter, because I think somebody pointed this out in the comments. I forgot their name. Sorry about that, but I did pin it in the last video. People talk about pressure. Well, people talk about blitzing when they want pressure, right? I don't think people want to blitz as much as people say they want to blitz to on the internet, because like blitzing is not necessarily a great strategy unless you can get pressure. And a lot of times teams that can't get pressure with their front four can't get pressure when they blitz, right? So it's about pressure, creating pressure. How do you create pressure? Well, the one thing I said the Browns' goal should be for the whole summer is they have to figure out how to make sure Myles Garrett is at number one in the league again, in double team rate. If they can get him to 2, 3, or 4, those numbers are going to come up. They're going to be all right. How are they going to go about doing that? Well, Jim Schwartz has a long, and again, this goes to, let's look at a guy like Perion Winfrey, right? Perion Winfrey walks into this locker room. It's the third year of Joe Woods, and guys are kind of in and out with him, right? So now, this guy, he's laying down some advice for you, and you're looking around, listening to everybody like, man, this guy doesn't even sound like he might be back this year if he doesn't have a good year. And then the season goes on. The defense has been a mess. Everybody's playing bad. The defensive tackle play is incredibly bad. And this dude's trying to tell you where to be, but you're watching everybody do what he's doing and stink. So how can a player develop in that scenario where you can't even trust your teacher? How can you learn when you don't think your teacher knows what you need to be taught? That's the situation some of these young guys were in. Jordan Elliott, Perion Winfrey, even Tommy Togiai, who I think's problems were bigger than that. But even Tommy Togiai was in that situation. Now, if Jim Schwartz comes in there, there's no question. Hey, this dude made Nick Fairley like a Pro Bowler. This dude was the defensive coordinator in the run of years that's going to probably put Ndamukong Suh into the Hall of Fame. Like, this dude knows what he's doing. Right? Absolutely 100% knows what he's doing, unquestionably knows what he's doing. And I think that's going to be important for the young guys. I think you could see something more from Jordan Elliott because of that. I think you could see something more from Perion Winfrey because of that. Maybe even a Taven Bryant can step up here, right? Better coaching doesn't really, it's going to help Myles Garrett, and it's going to put Myles Garrett in better position because he's competent, okay? And I don't think the last guy was competent. So it is going to help Myles Garrett. But the guy that's going to help the most are those guys who aren't going to be superstars, but could be good players, right? If you look at well-coached football teams, they're full of good players. Not the greatest players in the world, but good players, right? The most well-coached defense in the AFC North, Cincinnati Bengals. Unequivocally. They're not the most talented defense. You don't even argue that they're the best, right? I think Baltimore's probably the best defense because they have all that talent, and they are also well coached. But you look at Cincinnati's defense, nothing but good players, right? Not many great players. Like Trey Henderson is a great player. Jesse Bates is a pretty good player, but everybody else is just pretty good. Just good. You know what I mean? Von Bell, good player. You know what I mean? Because the coaching is good, and the better the coaching you get, the more you can get from role players. And the more solid play you can get from those guys. Pittsburgh, they're annoyingly always over 500 because they don't have star players right now, but they have so many pretty good players, right? That just step up and when they're given the opportunity because they're well coached. That's where I think you have to look for Jim Schwartz to be helpful in, right? JOK is going to be put in a better position to succeed, so he's going to make a leap. But JOK was already good before Jim Schwartz got there. He will continue to be good. Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, Martin Emerson, all these guys were good. They were fine, right? You're going to see what you want to see is an improvement from the Sione Takitakis of the world, the Jacob Phillips of the world, the Tony Fieldses of the world, the Alex Wrights. These are the guys that if Jim Schwartz makes a reasonable difference, a sizable difference in their level of play, then they become so much better. Another one of the things I felt like was interesting was when he talked about what brought him here, he mentioned that he worked with Andrew Berry. He really liked Andrew Berry. I'd just like to take this time to point out, people go out their way, even when they don't have to talk about how much they love Andrew Berry if they have the opportunity. That tells you a lot of what you need to know about what his peers think of him. And I tend to believe this. People who are highly respected amongst their peers tend to be very good at their job. Like, you don't get that level of respect if you are a grifter. I know people, like, just looking at what I do on YouTube, there are YouTubers who are not respected by other YouTubers for how they go about it. And those guys usually flame out. But the guys that everybody kind of like, yo, we respect game, we see game, those are the guys that stick around forever. Like, the people respected by their peers tend to be the ones that are good at it. And there is no question to me that Andrew Berry is very, very respected by his peers. But that's what I see from this introductory press conference. Let me know what you thought down below. Everybody else have a great day. Have a good night.